was thinking about competition for places at West Ham. Now, initially, I was thinking about it with the sort of Ben Rama and Maxwell Cornet dynamic. And then very quickly, my mind shifted towards how's Antonio handled competition for places. I think the Cornet one on the surface of it seems very, very interesting. So you've got this player that's been missing for 4 or 5 months, and you've got this other guy who's really Mr. Reliable inside Benrahma. Maybe not always in terms of performances, but he's always there for David Moyes to call upon. There's this suspicion amongst a lot of our fans that David Moyes don't fancy him quite that much. And then there's this other guy who's gone missing for a few months, and then he's come back into training, and David Moyes has spoken very public about Cornet. And he said things that if you were side Benrahma would have got you thinking. Because David Moyes is saying, this guy Cornet, he's a left winger. That's his preferred position. The reason I brought him in was I thought I'd play him on the left wing and he could provide us with 8 to 10 goals a season. Then you hear that David Moyes thinks he's been training well. I guess you don't need to hear David Moyes saying the words. You're in training yourself. I've no reason to disbelieve what Moyes has said there. If David Moyes says Cornet's been training well, I can only assume he's trained well. So Saïd Benrahma's been looking at this guy on the training pitch thinking actually he's a bit handy, he's not done too badly. He's here to take my place, and the manager sees him as playing in the role that I play in. And I think that's really interesting. That is a shot across the bows to Saïd Benrahma. Even if it wasn't directed at him, Moyes' comments, certainly you'd hear that and say, look, this guy plays in my position, by and large. It's either me or him. I'm not saying there won't be occasions when both of them wouldn't feature in the team, but by and large, that would be it. I do wonder how much Benrahma's little upturn in form is to do with that. He knows his place is up for grabs, so he's put in a couple of performances, a couple of assists against Nottingham Forest. For me, was man of the match against Manchester United. Thought he was the best winger on the pitch. He had some good wingers on that pitch. You had Anthony, you had Garnacho. I thought Benrahma was the best winger on the pitch. So I think he's really dealt with the competition for places situation really, really well. But as I say, my mind turned to Michail and Antonio. And I started to look at it and I thought, has he... Because initially I thought, oh, he's responded well to Danny Ings coming in. And it was because of the header that he scored against Nottingham Forest. But thinking about it, that was the 4th goal of the game, wasn't it? Sort of pressure was off then. They capitulated, Nottingham Forest. So I think there's probably other examples where you can look at it. I thought when Gianluca Scamacca came in, £35 million, third, Italian striker, very much it was a case of these two were going to fight it out to be the number one guy at West Ham, to be the first choice striker. I didn't think that Antonio responded particularly well for that. I would expect Antonio to have almost responded like Benrahma responded, but I didn't see an upturn from him. I thought we saw some pretty poor form. He's not been prolific at all this season, and in many respects, it's because he does the podcast. It almost seemed like he was complaining. He wanted to be the main man. Antonio loved all this stuff. The number 9 on the back of his shirt. He was very open towards discussing this particular storyline, this particular narrative in the press of him metamorphosising from a wide player into a striker. He loved the story himself. Yet when he didn't find himself into the team, I found there were some public comments, but not an awful lot of performances that he put in that shouted at David Moyes, oi, don't play that Scamacca, play me instead. So actually maybe looking back, he didn't rise to it particularly well. And now looking at when Danny Ings came in, and obviously got the injury straight away against Everton. He started against Nottingham Forest and scored 2 strikers' goals. Pure instinct. All right, one of them might have deflected, ricocheted off his heel, his leg, his shin, his bum, whatever it might have been. They don't care, strikers. They don't care about that stuff. The instinct was there. Right place, right time. They sense danger, don't they? The first goal, of course, was just a brilliant demonstration of contorting your body to finish. He basically, it was almost like he had to reach behind him, get the sand wedge. I don't mean sandwich, I'm talking golfing terms. Get an iron out of his golfing bag, reach behind him and sort of try and scoop it up into the goal. Again, real striker's characteristics on display there. So with him being cup-tied against Manchester United, I did feel the Manchester United game was an extremely good opportunity for Antonio to say to David Moyes, I'm still your guy. I can do this. I can be a viable alternative to Danny Ings. And I think he fluffed his lines. I mean, I've already said it in a previous video. I think by and large we did okay against Manchester United. I thought we were the best team for 65 minutes. I thought it was individual errors that cost us. 3 of them from Nathan Gert. Really, really bad day at the office, as I said. But also you got to lump Antonio in with that. Antonio had 2 really good opportunities to change the game. And there was actually somebody on yesterday's video made the point about Antonio. And they were talking about Mbappe. And I'd watched Mbappe play for West Ham under-21s against Brighton under-21s earlier on in the week. And I actually thought to myself, actually, Mbappe finishes that. Because against Brighton, if you haven't seen it, go and have a look. Because there is an opportunity that he gets in that game with Mbappe, which is not dissimilar to the opportunity that David Moyes found, that Michail Antonio found himself in against Manchester United. In this instance, Mbappe sort of finished it with a chipped outside of the foot finish. Very, very good, but he was composed. I'm not suggesting that David Moyes should play Mbappe ahead of Antonio. I'm just suggesting here was an example of West Ham play with a striker's instinct. And I did look at that after I read that comment, and I thought actually Mbappe would have finished that against Manchester United. They just got it. They know their distance in the strikers, where the goalkeeper rushing out, and that's what happens in that game against Brighton, the under-21 game. That doesn't fluster a striker who's got that sort of killer instinct. And Mbappe had it. And you almost felt the longer Antonio's run went on, and I mean, I'm talking about his run in the way he sort of progressed towards Manchester United's goal on David De Gea, the less likely he was to score. I didn't feel, there probably wasn't a person in Old Trafford who thought Antonio was going to finish that. And it was a bad miss. Then he had his chance later on in the second half. Not everything Antonio did was bad, by the way. He worked his socks off in that game. And he found himself on the wing in the second half, went past Martinez really well. I mean, it was the first stage of it was excellent wing play. And then what happened was he just didn't get his head up to play the ball. Now, this is sort of basic stuff, getting your head up, having a look. You do the trick, you get past your man, you have a look, you see what's on. And I'd suggest, if you haven't he's improved, by the way, as Antonio. He has improved in his career, but I'd suggest if you haven't got that by your mid-30s, you're probably not going to get that. So it's just a couple of instances of times in the game where he showed a complete lack of instinct on there. And it must be so stark when you see someone like Danny Ings finishing the way he does. And you have to assume, by the way, whilst we've heard that Maxwell Cornet did really well in training, you've got to assume that Danny Ings is doing that type of thing in training as well. I bet he's there doing like as in the 6-yard box, finding space, tapping it in. So I think the onus is very much on Danny Ings for us now for the rest of the season. And I just found it interesting that how Antonio has sort of responded for that, because there was this talk, wasn't it? I mean, he alluded to the fact, didn't actually say the words, but in his podcast he does with Callum Wilson, he very much alluded to the fact that he might be off in January. And as we understand it, Wolves were interested. And you also look at the situation with Scamacca. Now, I'm not going to judge the player on whatever he played against Manchester United, 10 minutes or whatever it was. But he didn't look sharp, did he? And okay, he's been out through injury, but I would suggest he hasn't looked particularly mobile, even in the games earlier on in the season when he was playing well. You look at that now and you look at David Moyes' system, you look at the way David Moyes wants to play, and Danny Ings looks more like the guy. You would just play Ings, wouldn't you? And of course the suggestion is, or the suspicion, that Scamacca's fed up. And I can understand why, for all reasons. I already covered it. Did a video 2 or 3 days ago about Scamacca. I won't repeat myself on that. Suffice to say, I can understand why Scamacca might be fed up. Once you accept that he is fed up, and you put that to one side, and you've made up your mind as to whether that's right or wrong and why that should be, you're still left with a question, who's the best person to play in the team against Brighton? Of course, it's Danny Ings, which is only going to make Scamacca more fed up. Which, of course, then begs the question, how does Scamacca react to competition for places? Well, I would say he's not reacted particularly well. I think in the times when he was dropped for Antonio, he didn't respond particularly well to that either. Ings, I've seen it all before, I guess, hasn't he, really? He's, he got the knock against Everton and he had to make a couple of substitutes appearances. And I was wondering, is David Moyes going to be able to get the best out of this guy? Look at a couple of goals that he scored against Nottingham Forest. They're Chicharito goals, aren't they? You know, they're poachers' goals. And I thought, is Moyes going to get the best out of him because he doesn't know what to do with those players? Well, I was wrong. I mean, David Moyes clearly must know what to do with him. Look, the proof of the pudding's in the tasting in this one. Whether we attack, I don't think we'll attack quite as much against Brighton as we will against Nottingham Forest for two reasons. Number one, Brighton are better than Nottingham Forest. Number two, we're away and not at home. But I mean, we had 12 corners against Nottingham Forest. You know, if we get 6 or 7, then I would still, in the game against Brighton, I'd still suggest we've done okay on that. But I still look at it and I think Danny Ings is still the man for the job. If you're going to get a chance, you want it to fall to someone, you'd want it to fall to him. Where's that leave Scamacca? I mean, that's a weird one, because if he's grumpy already, if he's looking to go back to Italy already, because he's not felt he's had the chances, what Scamacca really he needed it to go this way from now until the end of the season, which is he comes back from injury, he gets into the team, he starts scoring goals, he stays in the team from now until the rest of the season. Scamacca helps rescue us from relegation, maybe lift the conference, whatever it's called, the Europa Conference Trophy or whatever the bloody thing's called. That would have been the way. That would have been the story. Maybe then we keep him sort of cheerful and perky enough that he wants to stay, he wants to remain. If he's going to be from now until the end of the season a substitute, then maybe not so much. Now, David Moyes has been at pains to say we're going to need all these strikers in the running, and he's right. Look, we needed Antonio last night. Danny Ings couldn't play. There's going to be times if we continue and carry on progressing in Europe and we get to the next round, then David Moyes is going to have decisions to make. He's going to have to rest certain players at certain times. Which means when Danny Ings can't play, either Scamacca or Antonio are going to be brought into the team. But that's still a substitute, right? You're still a reserve. That's basically, you're still not the main man. And I think this is the point. I think Scamacca needs to be the main man, wants to be the main man. So I find that very interesting. We also know that Antonio also wants to be the main man. And the question is, how is he going to respond to it? But I think now if you look at it, and I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think we played well against Nottingham Forest. I think we played well against Manchester United. But we go back into that relegation zone very, very easily. So if we are going to survive and we are going to do well in Europe, then I do think all the pressure is on Danny Ings. And he may well find that for slightly different reasons, it could well be a very, very good signing, January signing, indeed. And for those of you who are of a certain vintage, you may well find this particular signing has a little whiff of the Hartson and Kitsons about it.